I am the co-chair of Momentum, and I'm delighted to be with you in this packed tent. This is brilliant. So the very first thing I'm going to do before we get into the substance of this is to tell you to go to the COP26coalition.org website. That's COP26coalition.org website. There you can follow COP26 Coalition on social media. Look on the website, you can find whether there's a local hub that will be organizing for actions on the 6th of November, and you can get plugged in that way and see if there's a local hub near you, and if there isn't, you can start one, and we'll be telling you a bit more about that in the substance of this session. So firstly, I am so happy that we are having this event at TWT, because this is one of the biggest gatherings of the left in the country, and it's critical more than ever that the left is engaged in the climate movement. It's not just that we need to educate ourselves on the climate movement. We have a lot to bring to the movement that the movement is lacking right now. We're seeing right now we're heading towards, I think, 2.9 degrees climate change, which is catastrophic for billions of people across the planet. And the current system, the neoliberal system, is unable to respond to the level of change that's needed and the scale and speed that's needed. And the left brings with it critiques of the neoliberal system. We bring tools, ideas, and policies for the level of structural change that is needed to take on this crisis. And we will protect workers, we'll protect the poorest while we do this and not sacrifice communities and workers. We need to tackle the dual crises of inequality, and we as a left have been a bastion of internationalism and solidarity with those in the global south, and we need to bring that to the movement as well. So it's really important that we learn how we can get involved and bring these desperately needed tools to the climate movement. So the session today, we will hear from activists and leaders across the labor movement that will debate the pressing issues facing workers and communities as we take on the climate crisis. I also wanted to let you know that there's a second session that will be happening around the corner in one of the other smaller tents, where you will be able to, please come to that. It's at 3 p.m. today, so almost directly after this one, where we will get to talk to you more directly and share with you some tools for organizing practically, to organize people, to take them to the climate mobilizations on the 6th of November. And so we're really looking forward to doing that planning on the ground with you at 3 p.m. today. So I am delighted to announce our first speaker, who is Assad Rahman. He is the director of War on Want and also part of the Global Green New Deal, and has been leading the COP26 coalition.
Thank you, Gaia. And thank you, comrades, sisters, brothers. I'm Assad Rahman, director of War on Want. I want to start with a quote, not from one of our own, but a quote from Milton Friedman, the architect of neoliberalism, who said, "Only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around, and the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable." And the reality, of course, is the crisis is already here. We all know it, and change is coming. The only question now is, what kind of change are we going to have? Is it going to be a world of walls and fences and disaster capitalism, where the poor are left to burn while the rich seek safety? Or are we going to have change which will deliver a world that is just and safe for all of us? And the reality, of course, is for the majority of people in the world, both in the global north but overwhelmingly in the global south, people are not dealing with just one crisis. They're dealing with multiple crises, compounding crises, each crisis amplifying the economic, racial, and gender inequities that have been hardwired into our systems. And it's a system that we should point out and call out. It's a system that spans an arc from slavery, colonialism, imperialism to neoliberalism. It's birthed not just the climate crisis, but the crisis of economic inequality. It's birthed, of course, the COVID vaccine apartheid, and, of course, now the global recession. And the idea that we keep being told of market fundamentalism that is going to solve this crisis, the very market fundamentalism whose only goal has been the accumulation of profit on the broken backs of people of the global south, even whilst our planet burns. And I just want to say something about the climate crisis, first and foremost, because I think too often it's not just the right, but even the progressive movements that have a cognitive dissonance on climate change and on the scale of the climate crisis, right? Like wealthy passengers sitting on the deck of the Titanic, too many people still sip cocktails, listen to the orchestra, think there's going to be some technological and miraculous answer to this climate crisis, even whilst the reality, of course, is that the poor, black, brown, indigenous people are already drowning in the hold. So we all know the killer floods, fires, and famines that are wreaking havoc all around the world. These are happening at just over 1 degree warming. The code red from humanity that the climate scientists warned about last month, well, the reality is, of course, we have to prevent a catastrophic breach of the 1.5 degree guardrail. But the reality is that the carbon budget for that 1.5 is at 5 years. 10, if you're willing to accept we have a 1 in 3 chance of not meeting that. And let's be honest, that 1 in 3 chance is not on us. It'll be the 1 in 3 chance on the people of the global south. Not one of us would get on a bus or a train leaving Brighton if they said that this train has a chance, a 1 in 3 chance of crashing. But that's what we're telling the rest of the world. And of course the UK, well, the UK has adopted a net zero 2050 target. More carbon colonialism, more accumulation of a carbon that it is not its fair share. The fair share of the UK would be at 0 by 2030, plus $1 trillion in reparations to the global south. But this is more than an environmental crisis, right? As Chico Mendes, the legendary Brazilian trade unionist environmentalist, said, environmentalism without class struggle is simply gardening. And I say that because, of course, when I talk about the multiple crises, we face a world with a crisis of inequality. Half of the world is struggling in poverty. 2 billion people go hungry. Billions lack the very basics needed for a dignified life: access to healthcare, education, social protection. Not by accident, because we've constructed an economic system that denies them those things. And we live, of course, in a world of absolute abundance. But we know that the wealth is, of course, accumulated by the small minority. Now, 70 years ago, War on Want, which was founded by the Labour movement as its radical charity that would focus on the root causes of poverty and inequality and injustice, published a report. It was called the Plan for Global Development. And 70 years ago, it called for a universal welfare system for all. It talked about food and energy being public goods owned by people. It talked about the importance of anti-imperialism and anti-colonialism in the Labour movement, and for us to be internationalists in our nature. Now, today, as War on Want, we call for a global Green New Deal. A global Green New Deal that, of course, tackles the crisis of the climate crisis, but also tackles inequality. And we can do this. Right? We can do this. We have to recognize, of course, looking over the last year, 500 million jobs have been lost, overwhelmingly in the global south. We have hundreds of millions of workers being laid off and being pushed into extreme poverty. But it doesn't have to be this way. When we demand here in this country £15 an hour for workers, and absolutely right, we should, it's not right then we're saying to workers in the global south, you stay in poverty. If we can demand £15 an hour, we can demand $15 a day for people in the global south, enough to be able to live with dignity. If we demand an NHS for us all, then we can demand a global NHS for everyone, social protection for everyone. We all know that this is absolutely possible. Just in the last year alone, the billionaires of this world have amassed an additional $5.5 trillion more in wealth in just this one last year alone. That's more than enough to be able to pay for the just transition that we know is needed. And it's what is needed? Well, the UN has already said, we need about $1.5 trillion each and every year for the next decade. And what do we have on offer? We have the rich countries, when they come to Glasgow in November, still not being able to meet their unmet promise of $100 billion from a decade ago. That's the scale of how serious they're taking the climate crisis. But also, the third thing we have to do in our global Green New Deal is not to rebuild our economy on the back of the global south, and not to greenlight a new wave of green colonialism. Our answer isn't going to be found in electric batteries. It's going to be found in a fundamental question of saying that energy and food have to be public goods, controlled by people, not for corporate exploitation, shared equitably. We know we can feed the world 3 times over. We know we can produce safely enough energy for 10 billion people, not just one light bulb or a phone charger for people in the global south, but enough productive energy for people to be able to live with a dignified life. But it can't be done if we have the unsustainable and excessive consumption of energy in the global north. But we also know that to deal with the climate crisis, you have to fix the global economy. And we are internationalists. We are anti-imperialists. Now, the colonialism and imperialism of the past, which used gunboats to be able to access and control the resources of the global south, that's no more. Now, the imperialism is the IMF and the World Bank. It's our global taxation system. It's our banks and corporations. In the City of London, our banks and companies control $1 trillion worth of mineral wealth of the continent of Africa, more than the entire GDP of every sub-Saharan country. Every sub-Saharan country. And even today, the poorest countries in the world are paying out $4.5 trillion in unsustainable debt repayments to the global north. And the IMF loans that have been issued to the global south to deal with the COVID pandemic, each and every one of them has written into their conditionalities that as soon as the pandemic is over, we have to have a new wave of global austerity, a new wave of opening up people's economies, a new wave of privatization, a new dash for profit of the global north. Now, it might seem huge for us. It might seem vast. It might seem even impossible at this moment for us to be talking about the kind of transformation that is needed. But until we, as internationalists, are making the argument, are not retreating behind the nation state, not talking about green deals within our own countries that are replicated on extractivism of the global south, until we stand true with our principles. Because on our banners, we don't say workers of England unite or workers of Britain unite. We say workers of the world unite, right? And we have to accept some hard truths. In every brick and mortar of this country is the blood and exploitation of people of the global south. Not just from slavery, right? Not just from colonialism. And the colonialism, some people tell me in the mainstream NGOs, you make too many ambitious demands about the kind of resources needed. I say, well, look, I'm not interested in making big demands of you. Why don't you just simply hand back the 45 trillion that Britain looted from India during the Raj? Why don't you hand back the 16 trillion that you've taken in capital flow since 1980? Why don't you stop the fact that for every $1 the global north gives to the global south, it takes $24 back from the global south to the global north? If we don't talk about the global economy and fixing the global economy, if we don't talk about eradicating neoliberalism and bringing together an economic system which is fair and just, we're not going to deal with this climate crisis. We're not. The reality is we will sit here watching as half the world burns all around us. We will sit here, as the UN Special Rapporteur said 2 years ago, creating climate apartheid, where the poor are left to burn and the rich seek safety. That's the dystopian, not just the future, but the reality. For us to change that dial, for us to move that dial, we have to build a movement, a powerful movement, an intersectional movement that says, yes, Black lives matter. They matter here, but they matter absolutely everywhere. Poor lives matter. The reality of workers' rights matter not just in this country, but they matter in every corner of the world. That's up to us. This movement isn't going to be created by anybody else. It's going to be created by us. Along this banner of all of around here, what do we say? We say the world transformed. We don't talk about Britain being transformed. We talk about the world being transformed. And that's our challenge now. And that's our responsibility. Nobody's going to come and do this. Nobody's going to build this movement apart from us. It's up to us to weave together these stories. It's up to us to bring together our movements. And it's up to us to center the climate crisis in each and everything that we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Assad. That was absolutely fantastic. I'm Ollie Armstrong. I work for a climate justice collective called Breathe, and I'll be co-chairing with my friend Gaia today. Just to say, we do have signing to my left here. If you or anyone with you would benefit from seeing the signing for this session, please do come over. We will shuffle people. Said that on your behalf, but we will. So please come over this side and we will sort that out. We're now going to have a run of a few speakers. And after each of those speakers, we're going to take a handful of questions. So just to say a couple of things on that. Questions, not statements, please. Let's keep them short and precise. The shorter your question is, the more we will get in. If you disagree, please disagree well and be kind. If you've asked a question already, please leave space for others. If you're a man who often talks and often asks questions, please leave space. Please consider leaving space for others. We'll take 3 questions at a time. And then if there's space, there'll be room for your questions at the end. Our first of the next speakers, our second speaker, is the wonderful Zara Sultana, who... That'll do, that's it.
Hi everyone, I have the task to now follow Assad, and I just want to say it's always an honor because going through the student movement, being involved with NUS, I always saw you on panels delivering incredible speeches like that, so it's an absolute honor to be on a panel with you and to be here on a panel in front of you guys, because usually I'm in the audience and I have been for many years as an activist, so I just want to say it's an absolute pleasure to see everyone in real life, not just on Zoom, not just on social media, and this is a really important panel. Assad has said everything and more, but there's no bigger issue, there's no bigger crisis than the climate crisis. We know that it is epoch-defining and all-encompassing, and that's one of the Green New Deal's crucial points of departure, the recognition that all politics is climate politics. And one reason for that urgency is the climate crisis. We know that capitalism has always meant misery, unfreedom, and even catastrophe for some. So socialism's necessity is nothing new. But never before has such an imperative for system change been so immediate. If we're going to avoid climate catastrophe becoming the default condition of life for the vast majority of people on this planet, that means one of our principles has to be, as said by the Swedish eco-socialist thinker Andreas Malm, as he suggests, speed as paramount virtue. So the key question for us and the whole movement is what kind of climate politics and what kind of eco-socialist strategy do we need over the coming years? But the starting point, I think, is always important for anything, and it's really important that we get our strategy right, and we need to be honest about what that is. It's almost needless to say, but we are in a weaker position than we were when we all last gathered in Brighton. 2 years ago, here in Brighton, party members and the vast majority of affiliated trade unionists committed to the most radical climate program that has been adopted by any major political party in the global north. And that was a socialist Green New Deal, a state-led program of rapid decarbonization through economic transformation with a 2030 net zero target. And that was developed by John, Jeremy, Becky Long-Bailey through conversations and debates with climate activists and trade unions, and that's really important to highlight. But we lost the election, obviously, we all know that, just when we needed it the most, and we can't sadly enact that program that we were so passionate about. And despite the best efforts of Ed Miliband, the current Labour leadership simply has no interest in the Green New Deal, and we need to be honest about that, beyond using it as a vacuous slogan. For Keir, hardwiring the Green New Deal into everything we do seems to mean virtually abandoning every aspect of it, despite so much having changed politically since 2019 in terms of winning the debate, in terms of how popular the environment was when it comes to the average voter in the UK. But some things haven't changed, and it's socialism, and it's the arguments we're making as socialists, with an analysis of the causes of climate breakdown and a plan that matches up to the scale of the challenge that we face. This is as true as it was 2 years ago. So I think the really important question is, what can we do to win the conversation, the debate, the argument, and the policy around climate justice in the coming years? And I think for that, we have 3 immediate big tasks. And that's popularizing our analysis, that's radicalizing our program, and it's working, like Assad said, to build a movement. No one's going to do it for us. It's on everyone in this room and everyone else in our communities to do that. And I'll quickly touch on each of those with knowledge that Ollie's in my eyesight, and if he starts making like signs, I'll have to wrap up really quickly. Many academics and commentators say that we live in a time called the Anthropocene. They blame humanity for the whole of climate breakdown, and this analysis denies reality and also erases history. It's not an analysis that keeps Tory politicians or fossil fuel billionaires up at night. We know that the transfer of carbon from geological reserves to the atmosphere isn't the work of the average human being in the street. It's the consequence of capitalism and its death spiral of accumulation. It is capitalism's profit motive that compels companies to seek ever more opportunities across the world to exploit and extract, paying absolutely no heed to what it means for the planet or its people. And this isn't anything new. I'm not saying anything radical. I'm not saying anything new to any of you, but we need to make this understanding common sense. We need to make sure that the Green New Deal is something that people on the street understand. So by the reality when we hopefully are plausibly able to reach and gain state power again, our 2019 program will look timid. That's what we need to be fighting for. Our Green New Deal by then needs to become more radical. Yes, it was great what we fought for. Yes, the arguments are still valid, but we need to be building a more ambitious program to deal with the scale of the challenges then. So the question then is, how do we do that? Firstly, as we are hurtling towards even more tipping points in climate breakdown, there's no point beating around the bush about tackling climate denial and also confronting the fossil fuel industry head on. It needs to be rapidly dismantled, and that needs to be done in a very just, democratic way. We're not saying shut these businesses down straight up. I mean, I would love that, but I don't think that's how it's going to work. It means taking fossil fuel companies into public ownership so we can manage the process in a just way of winding down their production and repurposing them with the interests of working people at mind. It means guaranteeing well-paid jobs, unionized jobs for everyone who's impacted. And secondly, our anti-imperialist politics are non-negotiable, and our international principles are uncompromising, full stop. Because far too often they haven't been, and for some people it's really convenient when things get a bit tricky, let's just drop internationalism, and it's an optional add-on for some people. Absolutely no. In confronting the climate emergency, this is not optional. This has to be the center front of our politics, because the climate struggle is a class struggle across borders. Finally, we need to repopularize our analysis and build support for a Green New Deal across society, and that means organizing to build a socialist climate movement, and that's the only way we can win climate justice. We can't do it without organizing in our communities. We can't do it without agitating on the streets. We can't do it with a powerful socialist climate movement and a socialist electoral project in Westminster. Without that, is powerless. So without building a socialist majority in this country, we need that to be able to gain state power. Is absolutely important, and movements will hit a brick wall without it. And let's always remember that Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, and he's not here yet, but I'm assured that he's on his way, on a train, without movement, his leadership wouldn't have been possible. It was all the organising we did on the streets. It was all the campaigns he had been involved with. It's all the coalitions that came together for that leadership. And they opened the Labour Party to a socialist leadership for the first time in our living memory, many people's living memory, and it can happen again. And I think we have to be hopeful that it can happen again, because it happened, and it can happen again, and we have to do that by organising in the party, organising in the streets, organising in our trade unions, and that's how we can win. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Zara. That was brilliant. Thank you. So, as Ollie said, we're going to be a bit experimental, and what we're going to do is just take a couple of questions and then, see who would be interested in answering them, and have a little bit of a chat in between every speaker, so you're not just being spoken at for a solid hour and a half. So, if anybody would like to ask a question, either to Assad or Zara or anyone else, the lady in the back with the glasses.
Hi. So we all know that under capitalism and the devastating effects it has on the environment, that those who are poor and those in the global south are often forced to pay the most profound price, despite having no to the least accountability and the least to give as it is. And it's such an injustice. We're reaching the point at the moment where we are actually seeing environmental asylum seekers in the global south who are losing their homes, particularly Indigenous people, and they are having to claim asylum because of what's happening in the climate crisis. I fear this is going to happen more to more and more people. How are we going to take accountability and help these people with the double issue of the awful right-wing rhetoric this country has against any kind of refugees and the denial of climate change and its effects? I mean, we've got Boris talking about Kermit the Frog on the global stage, and these people are losing their homes, they're dying, they need somewhere safe to be. How are we going to take on those two really profound issues so that we can make sure these people are safe?
Thank you. So we'll take a question from the person in the check shirt over there.
A second, thank you. Mike's just coming. Just here. Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. So my question is to the entire panel, and it is, what can we do to market to young people that slow fashion is more sustainable and better for the environment, and how can we convince these fashion-loving young people that it's better that way? So,
thanks. Gentleman right at the back, some gender balance.
What is the socialist response to the gas crisis, which looks set to impact the living standards of the developed world in the short to medium term, that is likely to be over all the papers, to exclusion of everything else in the months to come, that we have to really have to worry about?
Brilliant, thanks.
Climate asylum seekers, slow fashion, gas.
All right, so the first question was about climate asylum seekers. Would anybody like to address that? Maybe Clive?
Oh, yeah, good, thank you. Okay, thank you, that's great. Warm me up before I say something else. So I think in terms of climate refugees, for me, one of the things that I know some of us were trying to do during the Afghan crisis was trying to get through to the British public that hostile environment isn't just about some faceless migrant trying to come into this country to claim benefits, which is what this government pushes forward. It was actually the person clinging onto the plane. It was the people queuing up in sewage ditches, the people who were desperately screaming to get onto a plane. That is the face of a refugee. That is what it looked like. And that is what the British public, the vast majority of the British public, were angry that they were seeing that, because it was being beamed live into their TV, into their front rooms. So what we have to do is ensure that we explain to people that, A, this is happening in part because of us. We know that the bottom 50%, the poorest 50%, domestically and internationally, are responsible for 1/10 of resource use and carbon production, and yet the top 1% are responsible for 50%, or the top 10% are responsible for 50% of that use. So it's partly our responsibility and the systems that we have put in place in this country and the systems that we have put in place over the last 400 years, global injustices. So I think the point here is we need to convey to the British people that these people are human beings. The people you saw in Afghanistan are the people who are coming across in the Channel. There is no difference. And I think if you can make that point, if we can say that to people, if we can get that across to people, then we can begin to win the arguments. But clearly, none of this matters unless we have a movement and government that is prepared to do that and say that and win the argument. And at present, we're a long way from that.
I think we all know the reality. The reality is, of course, that people are already dying, are drowning in the Mediterranean, nameless, faceless people. And whilst every now and then, of course, there's a spark of indignation, the reality is where the global north is more than happy to sacrifice people. And yes, you know, the UN says 1 in 30 people will be displaced from their homes, right? Because of both the climate crisis and the crisis of inequality. The reality, of course, is that the overwhelming majority of them will be displaced internally in the poorest countries or to the neighboring countries. Very, very few people will ever be able to come to the global north. So yes, our demand should be that people have the right to move and we should have legal protection. But more importantly, we should be making the argument that people have the right not to move. And it's us and our actions that are forcing people to be displaced from their homes. And the solutions to stopping displacement, like the solutions to inequality and the climate crisis, this is where the moment of hope are exactly the same things. If you give people public services, if they have food, energy, if they've got social protection, those are the most important things that determine whether people are forced to move from their homes or not. I'm above and beyond, of course, of cutting the carbon pollution. But this is where, for too long, we've allowed the environment movement to say we're not political, that climate isn't political, that we don't need to take on the far right or right-wing populist ideas around racism and xenophobia. Those are exactly the ideas that the climate movement needs to take on. But it also needs to take on the argument that's happening increasingly amongst our governments, including the UK government and the US, which sees this crisis and says that the only response is going to be a militarized one, that we're going to have more borders and fences, we're going to need more warships, we're going to have to prevent people. And that's the reality of the hostile environment that we're seeing already in the UK. And it's a reality of policies by overwhelmingly the majority of the richest countries. It's the policies of the US, of Australia, of the UK, of most of the European countries. This is a real challenge to us, because we are living in a time where actually the body politics is to the right, where the body politics is saying, absolutely, we are willing to sacrifice people. To shift that, as we know, you have to take on populist ideas. That needs a progressive movement willing to make those arguments and not simply ignore them.
Without repeating any of the points, I just want to make 2 points about international law and then the media. So climate refugees aren't recognised within international law, but we have a government that doesn't even want to recognise their commitments to the Geneva Convention anyway when it comes to protecting and allowing asylum seekers. So I think, getting rid of the Tory government would be an amazing start to all of this, and having a progressive party that recognises every human being's right to live a life of dignity and security. And the second point about our media, which is controlled by a handful of billionaires, who, in their interest, it is very important to spread propaganda, anti-migrant propaganda, Islamophobic propaganda, transphobic propaganda, to divide us. So we blame our problems, our societal problems, with the NHS being privatised and has been by stealth, to the point that people can't get appointments on migrants, people not being able to get school spaces for their kids on migrants. It's all very convenient, and we need to be really holding the media to account in a way where we invest in alternative types of media. And we've got that on the left. We've got a growing ecosystem, Novara, Double Down News, Tribune, so many that if I'm missing someone out, I really don't mean to offend you. There's so many. But this is what we need to do. Our messaging has to be important. We need to be, now that it's safe and to continue doing things in a safe way, having conversations, having those difficult conversations with people in our families, in our communities, knocking on doors. And when they're talking about issues that are linked to local government, government cuts that are linked to central government's intentional policies of reducing public services for people. We say where that is happening and who's responsible and not allowing people to get away with anti-migrant politics. And that begins with all of us and a strong movement. And like Assad said, the climate movement needs to be one that recognizes that race and capitalism, these things that are like too political, you can't shy away from it. Otherwise, like Assad said, and I feel like I'm here to repeat everything that you've said, I can do that for you. You're welcome. Climate politics without touching on issues to do with race, issues to do with how capitalism is extractive and exploitative, is gardening. And I think we need to make sure the movement, the climate movement, is aware of that, and that we're shaping it as well, that we don't see these as individual movements, they're part of a whole movement. When we're talking about the NHS, when we're talking about health policy, migrant policy and migrants' rights, all of these things touch base. There's no such thing as a single issue like policy area, and I think that's something that we all have to also be campaigning for. But I think it's the media having those difficult conversations with our friends and investing in alternative types of media, and also, media reform would be good. I don't think the Labour Party is focused on a lot of priorities when it comes to real work right now because we're too busy meddling and trying to take away party democracy from our members. But I think that's another thing to add to the list.
Wow. That was like 3 very amazing, comprehensive answers to one question. So we're running a little bit behind on time. So what I'm going to do is introduce the lovely Clive Lewis, who's going to be speaking next. Lovely. Yeah.
Thank you. It's the first time I've been called lovely in a long time. So thank you. Yeah. Okay. Where do we go from there? Okay, so one of the things that I think we need to ask ourselves, and I've got kind of copious notes. I've been making notes actually, listening to the speakers. I don't want to try and repeat what's been said because you come along, you prepare your speech, and then you think, shit, everyone said what I was going to say. So, but obviously said it so much better. So what I'm going to try and talk about is another angle, which is that we need to understand that the climate crisis is a function of a crisis of capitalism, and it's also a crisis of democracy. And I want to expand on that a little bit. We're talking, and it's quite a good theme, a crisis of democracy here at Labour Party conference this year. But the point is, democracy is under attack, it's under threat. And what do we mean by democracy? It means the public, the people of a country imposing its will over not just the means of production, but over the political direction of this country. In that definition, do we have a democracy? Clearly not. Now, one of the key parts of the Green New Deal bill that's going on to the conference floor, and I'm unsure because I didn't see from last night, from the other day, whether it went through composite effectively. One of the key... I have to say that again.
Thank you. I hand the mic to my great friend, Clive Lewis.
You didn't say lovely. I'm deeply offended now. Where were we? When I have finished, you want to walk back on again, and I get that kind of applause. So, the crisis of democracy. Where were we? The crisis of democracy. So, we've got a crisis of democracy, and by any stretch of the imagination, we don't live in a democracy. So how are we going to have a Green New Deal if we don't live in a democracy? We can have a movement, and we need to build a movement. We need to push politicians. We need to push politics, but we need to change politics. We need to change how the state works. And that's not something we on the left like to talk about. We like to talk about controlling, democratic control of the economy, which is critical. But the really boring bit about the Constitution, about how the state works, about how we would deliver a Green New Deal is critical. And it was a guy called Neil Acheson back in 1985 who said, if you want to get social and economic justice out of the current British state, where sovereignty lies with the Crown, think about that, not with the people, but with the Crown. If you want to get social and economic justice from the British state, you might as well, you're more chance of milking a vulture. Now, that was the quote that he gave, and you're probably thinking, how would you milk a vulture? But actually, you can't milk a vulture, and you cannot get social and economic justice from the current democratic system that we have in this country. Now, people think I'm always banging on about PR because I'm in love with proportional voting systems. PR is just a pillar in the process of beginning to radically change democracy in this country. And until we do that, all we will get is blue team, red team. Blue team, red team, basically regurgitating the same policies in the interest of capital. Until we take control of the commanding heights of democracy of this country and the economy, the Green New Deal will be nothing but words on paper and platitudes. Now, one of the things I also, so that's the democracy, that's the crisis of democracy kind of parked away for a second, but we will come back to it. One of the other areas that we can see is the increasing authoritarianism, because we have a crisis of capital. Okay, you can see which direction it's heading in. Never let a good crisis go to waste is their mantra. And they can see the climate crisis is creating the perfect opportunity to begin to repress what little democracy we have. The police, crime, and sentencing bill. Yeah, stopping our right, stopping the right of trade unionists to picket if a police officer thinks that they're going to cause a disturbance. Think about that for a second. Think about what the Chartists and others all over those centuries of trade union rights, fighting for trade union rights. Think about where we've ended up, where a picket line can be stopped by an unaccountable police officer because it's causing a racket. Think about that. Think of what kind of democracy we live in. So if we live in a democracy like that, how the hell do you think we're going to get race justice, climate justice from a system where we can't even have a picket outside a factory or workplace when the employer is treating us like dirt? So you need to think really carefully how everything is interlinked together. So we know that the authoritarian power of this government is on the increase, and we know that Parliament is incapable of stopping it. We have a minority government. I say a minority government because only 44% of the electorate actually voted, and they got an 81-seat majority. How does that work? How does that work? And it works because we have a political voting system that allows that, but we have no constitution in this country. Environmental rights are not protected. Human rights are not protected, but they're in another place, but not in this country. Workers' rights are not protected. There's nothing in the Constitution that protects that. The environment isn't protected. So if we actually want to have a Green New Deal, if we want to be able to have governments that represent and reflect the people of this country and their desires and their needs, then we need to have a democratic revolution in this country. And until we have that, we will not have a Green New Deal. Now, that's worth the paper it's printed on. I also want to touch very quickly on EVs. Gigafactories were mentioned today. And I just want to pick up on this kind of narrative of why are we obsessing about EVs, about this privatized transport system, where we're going to basically go to a kind of Jetson-style EV future, where everyone will swap their petrol or diesel car for an electric vehicle? There isn't enough materials, enough rare earths, rare metals on the planet unless you turn Africa into an open gaping sore to extract those minerals from that, to have that. That's more extractionism, more colonialism, more neo-imperialism. And yet today we were talking about mass industrialization, reindustrialization of EVs. I think we need to think that when we talk about our environmental policy, when we talk about a Green New Deal, a global Green New Deal, it has to have global justice at its heart. Yes, I want to see a car manufacturing industry in this country, but it has to be to scale, and it has to get behind and in line a mass program of public transport in this country, because that is the heart of a Green New Deal. Finally, I'm just going to give a plug to a group of us in Parliament who are pushing the Green New Deal bill. Myself, Caroline Lucas, and Zara, and many others have now sponsored this bill. It's going to be republished next month. It is the gold standard of Green New Deals on this planet. We have talked to trade unions, to civil society, to interest groups, to climate activists, and we have produced a bill which we think is the gold standard. When it comes out, we really hope you can get behind it. Green New Deal Rising is already behind it, as are other members of the climate movement. But not just that, we're not stopping there. We've also launched an initiative called the Global Green New Deal. And that has legislators from across the world who are now beginning to iron out what it means to have an internationally recognized standard for a Green New Deal and not an international greenwash New Deal, which I think is really important. Some of the people who are on this global Green New Deal, Ilhan Omar, Rashid Talib, Manon Aubrey, Pauea Vega, Yanis Varoufakis, Caroline Lucas, myself, and many others. Get your member of parliament to sign up to the global Green New Deal. You yourselves can sign up for the global Green New Deal, and let's make this Green New Deal international. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clive. I just would like to quickly bring some equity to the situation. Gaia and I would like to make it clear that as well as thinking that Clive is lovely, that Assad is also lovely, as is Zara. And in a minute, we're going to have the lovely Olivia, then the lovely Jeremy. We're going to change the format slightly. We're going to have Olivia, then Jeremy, then Gaia will lead. Oh, sorry, Camille is also lovely. Gaia is also lovely. And then we will have questions from you lovely lot too. Yes, we're going to have Olivia, then Jeremy, and then we'll have a bit of a free-for-all, take lots of questions, somewhat contradictory after I've just rambled on. But if you keep your questions concise, we'll fit more in. Olivia.
Thank you. You've obviously never crossed me, if you think I'm lovely. Sorry. As we all know, and it's great to be on this platform with so many inspirational speakers, and I'm hoping to bring a different aspect of the debate into this. And I wrote in Tribune about it recently, about why we shouldn't just talk about carbon, why we shouldn't just talk about our economy, but why we need to talk about the ecological crisis as well. This is the biggest challenge facing our planet and the future of our country and our planet. I'll keep on saying and our planet, so everyone hears that message. More than 1 in 10 of UK species are at risk of extinction. 40% of our trees are at risk, and a third internationally. The abundance of UK wildlife has fallen, and we have lost 1 in 6 of our animals, birds, fish, and plants in the UK since the 1970s. This is a crisis of an unprecedented scale. It already affects every part of our planet, and we are not immune from it here, and everybody on it. But that means it demands an unprecedented mobilisation of resource and of political will to deal with it. The UN called the most recent IPCC report a code red for humanity, saying that we need immediate, rapid and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gases if we are to avoid catastrophe. When many of our coastal communities, like we are in today, are forecasted to be underwater, I'm not sure if Brighton's forecast to be underwater, but is anyone here from Hull? Hull is set to be underwater quite soon if we're not careful, so just make sure you're prepared for that. Unfortunately, when extreme weather events cause our agriculture systems to collapse, and when every 0.1 degree Celsius rise will equate to the death of thousands, we really need to take that in the terms of catastrophe. As a movement, our response to catastrophe must be transformation, a crisis to renewal. And this must be done with the Green New Deal principles in mind. That climate justice is indivisible from social and economic justice, as others have said. Climate action must have social and economic justice in mind. So when we look at to mitigate flooding, for example, we must look at the causes. If our communities are flooding because wealthy landowners are burning moorlands upstream to facilitate grouse shooting, turning runoff into flooding, then that is a class issue. The solution proposed in our last manifesto was to expand community right to buy, so that if land is being intentionally mismanaged by landowners to the detriment of those living nearby, then they could take ownership of that land and put it to socially better use. The next Labour government must put Green New Deal principles at the heart of absolutely everything we do, ensuring that social and economic justice guide any decisions made about people and planet. We will have to look to rewilding our natural environment, but that does not mean compromising on access to nature. That cannot mean diminishing the right to roam. We know that access to nature is an issue of social and economic justice determined by race and class. 1 in 8 UK households do not have a garden, and black people are nearly 4 times as likely as white people to not have any outdoor space at home. As Labour's Shadow Minister for Nature, Flooding and Water, I am looking to deliver policies that reverse the biodiversity, I should be able to say that, crisis, and renew our natural environment. But we will also do this in a way that tackles the inequalities that are baked into our economy and society. But the climate emergency is exactly that, an emergency. It won't wait for the next Labour government. The Tories, led by Alex Sharma, will be going to COP26 at Glasgow in a few weeks with no plan, no purpose, no answers. Whose track record on the climate has been one of half-hearted targets and broken promises. And from now until COP and afterwards, we have to mobilise to deliver the just solutions to the climate and ecological crisis we are in. I know that Labour councillors, activists, Labour for a Green New Deal groups across the country are looking what they can do right now to solve some of these crises. Running campaigns to create more sustainable modes of transportation. In my own constituency, we've put in a bid to rapidly increase rail transport in our Sheaf Valley bid, which is great. But we need more people to be fighting for better transport systems, more accountable transport systems, more democratic transport systems in the local areas. Looking to ensure that local authority supply chains are decarbonised and contracts are given with social, economic and environmental justice in mind, and also ethical. When I was deputy leader at Sheffield City Council, insourced a hell of a lot of services, but I also brought in an ethical procurement policy. And the reason I did that is, unfortunately, too many companies internationally do the wrong thing elsewhere, but still get given public money here. That should end. In the absence of a radical Labour government in power, we need to make the most of devolution of the powers available to our councils and mayoral combined authorities, which we can take action now on transport, on green spaces and on energy. In Sheffield, our council is delivering an ambitious project to reduce flooding in partnership with the Environment Agency and other partners by planting trees and restoring moorlands. Important work, but we need it at a scale that can actually deliver. Showing that we can deliver for nature in a way that delivers for climate, and that we can do this even before we get into power. Because we can't wait until 2030, and we certainly can't wait until 2050, the Tories' ambitious target. We have to act now at every level we can, in every way we can. Everyone get involved. The time is now.
Thank you, Olivia. That was fantastic. Our next speaker is Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and I'm pleased to have the talking stick in my hand at the moment. And I'm apologising, I was a bit late coming. I came on the train, which was slightly delayed. I want to say thank you to The World Transformed for all that it does, arranging this great space for these kind of debates and discussions. And I'm so proud of the quality of debate that goes on in The World Transformed. Frankly, the whole conference should be discussing all these issues, not unnecessary, undemanded or unwanted rule changes. And we should be getting on with the issues that we all face. I was very proud on May Day 2019 to move in Parliament on behalf of the Labour Party the motion that Britain should declare a climate emergency, that our Parliament should do so. And I put the case forward for declaring the climate emergency, all the arguments that Olivia has just so excellently put, and Clive and others. And we put that forward. Michael Gove got up to oppose it from the government, couldn't really find any reason not to support it, but found plenty of reason not to like me. Well, I'm quite content that Michael Gove doesn't like me, that's all right. It doesn't keep me awake at night, and I don't think it should keep anybody else awake at night. But the significance was that we put that forward on the basis that we wanted to be one of the first, indeed the first parliament in the world to do that. We also called for the government to do 6 monthly reports on the progress on this. We're yet to await the first report on this. There simply hasn't been one. They are disappearing into international deals and greenwash rather than dealing with the crucial issues that Olivia and Clive have put forward. The climate emergency is here, now, and real. The biodiversity crisis is here, now, and real. The loss of habitat, the loss of wildlife, the loss of open space, the loss of insects actually is incredibly damaging to the natural world for all of us. And the reality of climate change is there. It's pretty obvious. Look at global weather patterns, look at global temperature rises, look at global sea level rises, look at increased flooding, look at increased unusual weather patterns, and these 100-year storms are now coming up more and more frequently. The issue is very, very serious. And yes, we have to mitigate against flooding in every way that you can. And the issues are about working with nature, not against it. It's not necessarily covering every coastal area in concrete. It's about upstream flood prevention, re-allowing floodplains, replanting upland areas. It's all of those natural solutions that many in the Environment Agency want to pursue, but the government is more interested in handing contracts out to people to build flood prevention dams all over the place. I'm not saying there isn't a place for some flood prevention measures in city areas. There is, but you have to look at the natural solution upstream as well. And this climate emergency around the world does not fall equally. You look at the countries in the world that have made the least emissions, done the least damage to the environment, produce the least greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide and other things, and they are the ones that are suffering the most and the worst. It's the poorest children in the poorest cities that are breathing the foulest air. It is the poorest people in the cities of the world that have the shortest life expectancy, and that life expectancy is getting shorter. There is already massive inequality in this country. At a global level, the inequality is far worse. It was only during COVID lockdown that people in Delhi were able to see the Lutyens buildings, often for the first time, because Delhi is surrounded, is covered in smog most of the year round. And that was an experience around the world for many others. We showed during lockdown it is possible for a society and an economy to survive without the massive levels of pollution by unregulated transport and all the rest of it. So it is up to all of us to ensure that that campaigning is part of it. And when we come to Glasgow for COP26, it's the voices of working class communities around the world and in Britain that I want to be heard. We'll be there with the Project for Justice and Peace. Indeed, we're supporting this meeting today, and we'll be there throughout COP26, trying to make sure that those voices are heard and those avenues for working class communities to be able to contribute are heard. But it is understanding that this is a class issue. There will be loads and loads of greenwash surrounding Glasgow. There will be every global corporation on the planet telling us how green they are. Richard Branson may even step out of his spaceship and say that he really loves the environment, and there wasn't that many tons of carbon created by his brief visit to outer space. Well, come on, guys. Let's think about what causes this. It is a thirst for resources. It is an economy based on greed, not need. It is a global economic system based on need, not greed. Surely if the one lesson that comes out of COVID is that we depend on each other's standard of health and each other's standard of living to survive. So ensure there is decent healthcare all around the world. Healthcare is doctors, is nurses, is hospitals. Healthcare is also clean air, clean water, and sanitation. And so we have to ensure that those issues come center stage. But it's also sometimes the case that in the environmental movement, people get into a sort of virtue signaling all the time, saying, I only eat organically produced food. I ensure that my water is filtered, and I can afford to buy the good quality organic food. For many people, that is not a choice. They have to buy the cheapest food that is available in the supermarket. They may not want to buy battery farmed eggs or intensively produced meat. They may not want any of that, but they simply don't have the economic resources for that choice. And so it is also a massive class issue. And I don't want to see a greened economy created on the basis of mass redundancies of those that work in industries that are polluting. And so it is about investment for a green industrial revolution that protects jobs, converts industry, and creates good quality, high-paid, high-skilled, sustainable green energy jobs in a sustainable economy in this country. So it is a trade union issue. And that's why on November the 5th, we're asking trade unions and workplace representatives to start that conversation with their workmates and with their employers about how their industry and their company is going to become more sustainable, and how on the big demonstrations all over the country on November the 6th, we want a massive trade union presence there so that we don't say we are going to green the economy and bring in a green industrial revolution at the expense of those that work in those industries. It is about converting them. My late great friend, David Graeber, wonderful, imaginative man, sadly was taken from us a year ago. He died very suddenly and very unexpectedly. He managed to bring together the principles of what the Corrytown oil refinery workers were campaigning for, secure jobs, sustainable and all that, with those who were protesting about the pollution levels of the oil refining industry. The class interests of those of us that want to live in a clean, green world and those that work in industries have got to be one and the same. If you don't build that solidarity, we will not build the green industrial revolution that we do desperately need to build in this country and around the world. And I'm being hinted at to shut up, so I will do that in just a couple of sentences, if that's all right, Comrade Chair. I'd just say this. In our campaigning work, be inclusive, be demanding, and be changing of things. But also demand in our international relations and our trade relations, we include human rights, environmental sustainability, pollution levels in all of those trade deals. So importing manufactured goods from Australia and exporting manufactured goods to Australia doesn't seem to me a very sensible thing to do. All you're doing is carting lumps of steel from one end of the earth to the other. Maybe they should be all made more locally, and we should be supporting each other in campaigning for sustainable trade system and social justice that goes with it. The environment is the cause of the time. Free enterprise, market forces, markets will not solve it. Dennis Skinner once memorably said to Margaret Thatcher, "You'll not fix the hole in the ozone layer with a man, a bike, and an enterprise allowance." Some of you are too young to remember enterprise allowances. But what you can fix it with is collective global action, is public ownership of energy, of water, of all the other transport industries as well, and you can fix it by public investment. Our mission is a public solution to a public need to end the domination of private greed, which has done so much damage to our country, our environment, and our planet. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Sorry, I was just saying, I know you guys have to get it all out. You have to clap, so it's all good. Thank you so much. That was brilliant. I just enjoyed listening to all of these speakers so much. So we have about 10 minutes for questions. So if we've got any, I'm going to start with this person here. Yeah.
Who's got the mics?
It's over here. And yeah, please do keep your questions as short as possible, because then we can get more in.
Yeah. How do we get rid of the monetary fund?
Oh.
The international monetary fund.
It's a good question. The young man over there with a nice sweater.
I think my sweater's quite nice too, thank you. My question is, obviously the international working class is suffering at the hands of global capitalists in terms of climate change and ecological crisis. In New Cross, in South London, flooding is starting to happen. It's going to destroy local working class black people. What can we do locally as socialists and in the Labour Party to campaign on the local effects of climate change?
Thank you. And let's take that lady with the olive green top over there and the glasses.
Do you think our current environmental legislation acts such as the Wildlife and Countryside Act and Marine and Coastal Access Act are robust enough when we implement a Green New Deal, or do we need to make more fit-for-purpose policy on environmental legislation?
Great, thank you. So let's start with the first one, which is the IMF. Oh, no, let's start with the last one. No, let's start with that. Wildlife Protection Act, that's your wheelhouse.
I'm going to pick up flooding as well, if that's okay, because it's really, really important. And I think that there's a big issue that we can talk about how we can stop catastrophe, but we also have to talk about resilience in communities and what actually great work some places are already doing on this around catchments and trying to mitigate flooding. But there's lots of different types of flooding. And I would ask all of you to go onto the River Trust's report that they launched this week, because it gives you so much data, and if you're an absolute geek like me, you can get well into the numbers of your local rivers. And what it shows, it's got a very interesting graph on there, which shows that the infrastructure around sewers, and sewers are more interesting than you'd imagine, is so old and rubbish because of lack of investment, because of lack of infrastructure kind of improvements, not making more space for water. You know, we're all chucking 40-odd litres or whatever a day down the drains and hoping it'll go into sewers that were built for half the population. It doesn't make any sense in some of our cities. And that really tells the picture of why, you know, we need to have that conversation about water. We need to be talking about it as a party, because if we don't manage where water is, everyone just turns to the local councils and says, oh, it's your fault for not unblocking the drains. It's like, those drains could be as unblocked as you'd like, but at the end of the day, the structures just aren't there, and we need to have a big grown-up conversation about what we can do to hold water back in nature-based solutions, to make our roofs and our grey scapes, as I call them, into green landscapes in our city centres, and what more we can be doing to hold water away from people's homes and protecting it. And insurance is a big part of that as well. But yeah, on the Environment Bill, which is coming up very soon, we've got quite a few amendments through the Lords, which is interesting. And I think that the problem with this government is they're very good at greenwashing. So they'll come out and say all the right stuff, and they'll be like, we're bold and we're ambitious. We're going to reverse the nature decline. It's rubbish, and they don't have the targets there that they need. And you know, I see my job as trying to hold them to account for that. But that's not really enough. So we all need to be doing as much as we can locally on this agenda as well as nationally, because at the moment we're kind of just on a train to nowhere with this government when it comes to nature. So yeah.
Just very quick. Thanks, Olivia. I agree with absolutely all of that, and thank you for the question. On local flooding, obviously, you have to look at drainage systems and so on. You also have to look at what can be achieved locally through planning campaigns about creating more, not less, permeable layers by having underground retention tanks with a permeable bottom so that excessive rainfall goes into them, and then the water then leaches into the aquifers down below rather than blocking up the drainage system, which ends up with putting sewage in the rivers all over this country. It can be done by often quite detailed work. I'm very proud of the fact that my council has tasked with building new houses on one of our existing estates. The team has also managed to create 5% more permeable land on that estate, which is actually quite a lot for one small area. These things can be done. So practical local campaigning raises the awareness about how to manage it. And so it is also about not building on floodplains. It is also about upstream planting and all that. So you actually manage water flow. I mean, remember all the debates about everybody said you should dredge the River Parrett in Somerset. Yeah, you dredge it and it fell up with silt again the next day. But in fact, the Environment Agency, better half, has done a lot of work upstream by upstream planting, which has reduced the winter runoff and has reduced the flooding problems. It does work. It doesn't happen straight away. It takes a few years to do it, but we've got to think in those terms.
Can I just go back first to that garment workers question, I think, from last time? Look, last year we remember the slogan, right? Every political leader in the global north, no one is safe until everyone is safe. Rich countries rip up the neoliberal rule book, intervene into their economies, you know, do all the things that they said are not possible, and of course denied that to the global south. And a snapshot of that was, of course, the garment sector, right? Where our big brands shut the factory gates, left workers destitute, without any support, one-on-one. We work with garment workers' unions all around the world. Garment workers' unions having to intervene to protect their members from literally starving. No social protection, no wages, etc. And even till now, big brands refusing to pay those wages back. And now that our shops are open, of course, the COVID pandemic is wreaking havoc in the global south. 250 million cases, 5 million people dead, and garment workers have been told, you are essential workers and have to go back into overcrowded factories, go back without any vaccines, because our big brands want those things produced. Now, our answer isn't to consume less. It's to consume better. It isn't ethical consumption. It's to become political consumers. It's not for us just to say, well, all right, we can consume less. What happens to the workers in that garment sector? No, of course, they want to produce less. Of course they do. But they also want a living wage. They want social protection. So our job in this moment about slow fashion and sustainable fashion is absolutely right. Take those individual steps, but actually build a movement to hold our brands to account, to hold this sector and actually have a transformation so that garment workers are not the ones that pay the price. And that is true of all of the supply chains all around the world. On the question of the IMF and World Bank, look, in 1999, many of us, well, some of us, remember Seattle, and we were on the streets, right? Creating an incredible, powerful alliance of trade unions, of environmental groups, of social movements from the global south, saying the WTO, IMF, and World Bank were not fit for purpose. We fought all about the global economy. And I have to say, it's been an absolute source, not just of regret, but it's absolutely outrageous that the movements in the global north turned their back on the global south, turn their back about the global economy, turn their attention away from all those things for the last decade or so. The global south movements have still been fighting in all of each and every one of those places. They've been resisting, but it's the UK, the fifth most powerful economy in the world, that has the most influence in the IMF and the World Bank. And at this moment, we shouldn't be tinkering around the edges. We should be saying absolutely abolish the IMF and World Bank. What we need is a global fund for cooperation and justice. A global fund that will be the way in which we deliver the global justice transition that is needed.
So if we're quick, we can fit a few more questions in, and the nature of how... I just want to say something that I think is important, right? So hands down for a second. The nature of me and Gaia chairing this allows us the privilege of handing over a platform. So we're now going to choose young people and people of colour to offer that platform to with questions. We think that's vital.
Hi. Oh, that's better. Hi, I'm Kleiner from Totnes and Make Votes Matter. I just want to ask, given the very overwhelming evidence for the link between proportional representation and faster action on the climate crisis and on environmental legislation, what is the panel's view on the 153 motions for PR that's come to this conference that's going to be debated tomorrow? Do you think that's something that the Labour Party should be supporting? Thanks.
And then Emma, the lady behind you.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah. What can we do? Oh, because there are so many MPs here, I wanted to ask, how can we ensure that the environmental ministry or the environmental, the environmental ministry is the nodal ministry going forward for all policies? Because like Jeremy pointed out, we have on the one side going to COP, on the other side trade deals with Australia.
Thank you. Let's take those two. We'll see if we've got time after. If we get through these, I will come back to the floor. Who wants to?
I've been Shanghai to take the PR question, which is surprising. Look, the reason I think that PR has been put forward by a record number of CLPs to this conference is that people are screaming out for a democratic change in this country. PR isn't a silver bullet. Let's be really clear. PR is just one element of the changes that need to take place in this country, some of which I outlined earlier when I was speaking. But look, if you look at some of the most progressive countries, if you want economies in Western Europe, faults and all, New Zealand, the Scandinavian countries, they have a form of proportional representation. I think the only other country that has first past the post is Belarus. So I think in the entire world, so we're in poor company. So I think ultimately PR means everyone votes count. Everyone has an incentive to vote, and I think that's good for democracy. And we know that the vast majority of the public, and definitely members, are way ahead of the curve, more progressive than their elected representatives.
Hey everyone, my name's Camille Barbagallo, and I'm the COP26 Coalition Coordinator. And I've been asked today to talk to you about mobilising and organising before, during and after COP26. So unlike a lot of people who work for NGO climate justice organisations, I'm not here to tell you that time is running out, tick-tock, or that this is our last chance to save the world. As we've heard from everyone here today, we blew through those limits and those deadlines decades ago. The reality is the crisis is here, and it's been here for many people around the world for many years. It's also really important that we understand that we can't scare people into caring about their problems. We know that when we try to use fear and fear tactics, that people actually start supporting reactionary solutions. And we also know that because when we look at the far right, that's exactly what they do, right? They use fear to fuel racism. So in our organising, when we're thinking about climate justice, we have to walk a really difficult line. And that difficult line is one of urgency and the fact that people are scared and that the scale of the problem that we face is immense. So I'm also not here to tell you that everything's sorted out in the climate justice movement and that all you need to do is keep posting on Twitter and email your MPs. No one is coming to save us. As frightening as the reality can be, we are the people that we have been waiting for. So let's just also be really clear that we cannot build a climate justice movement that thinks about the environment movement without nature. That, I'm looking at you, luxury communism and accelerationists. We also can't build a climate justice movement that has a relationship to the environment movement of one without people. I'm looking at you, David Attenborough, and every campaign that is run around polar bears. Both of those, without nature and without people, are dead ends for our movement. What we need to do is radically transform our relationship to the more than human world. And that is the exciting part, because everything has to change. So what I am here to tell you about, told you a few things I'm not going to tell you about, is that the climate crisis offers us an opportunity to connect our struggles. So your struggle for higher wages, for sick breaks, for decent working conditions, that is a climate justice struggle. Our struggle for abortion rights in Northern Ireland, that is a climate justice struggle. Our struggle to stop the police killing our brown and black sisters, that is a climate justice struggle. This is our opportunity to take intersectionality out of the theory books and to bring it onto the streets. It is our responsibility to do the messy, difficult, complex work of what it means to knit and weave social struggles together. It's not going to be easy. People will and can make mistakes, and we have to keep going anyway. And this is where our power lies. This is where the power lies, and it lies with you. That is where hope lies. This November, when COP comes to Glasgow, we have to be out on the streets in numbers that we have not seen in over 18 months. 2 weeks ago, the COP Coalition launched the Global Day of Action. We launched a decentralized mobilizing strategy because taking care of our movement and responding to the COVID crisis remains a #1 priority for the climate justice movement. There will be mass demonstrations in cities and towns near you. When you look on the action map and you don't find your city or town, what do you think the answer is? Exactly. You're going to start organising one, right? It's not hard, and you can do it in the next 6 weeks. So obviously, we need to mobilise before, during, and crucially after COP leaves town, right? COP is not the end game. COP, there are so many problems with the COP process, let me tell you, having been deep inside it for the last 18 months. And let me also say this, if marching from A to B ain't your thing, and I got some sympathies for that critique, right? Then organise direct actions. That's the other option. It's not an either or at all. We need all kinds of activity. We need mass mobilisations. They need to be inclusive and involve absolutely everyone. But we also need direct actions. If you're thinking about the kinds of direct actions we need, I'd take a look at the policing and crime bill. Your actions need to be noisy, disruptive, and highly organised. Though, to be honest, the jury's out on the effectiveness of the one-person demonstrations, I've got to say. All right. If you're looking for targets of what your direct actions could look and take action against, think about fossil fuels and think about what our Indigenous and frontline communities have been saying for decades. It has to stay in the ground. Keep it in the ground. That is the political demand from the Global South. That is what we need to do here and across the Global North. And if you think, oh, well, I'm not really a fossil fuel worker, you know, neither am I, you have to now start thinking about what your job does, right? And how you can organise at work and how organising at work connects to the climate justice struggle. If you don't know about the New South Wales Builders Labourers Federation from 1970s, you probably haven't hung out with me when I've had a few too many beers, because I talked about it to everyone. Those courageous trade unionists implemented green bans because they understood the power of the working class. They understood their power, and they understood where power actually lies. We have an immense task ahead of us, right? You have to find out where your power lies. And your power, in a large degree, lies at work and transforming work. And in transforming the kinds of work we do, we get to the heart of actually what's causing emissions and causing injustice. So, things are obviously going very badly, as you've heard from the panel already. But we've heard a lot of doom, and I think it's really important that we also think about how we generate hope, because we have to have hope, right? Otherwise, it's just a silly nihilist game. And so, for me, where hope lies is that we can and must change everything. That is the message from Climate Justice, and I will see you on the streets on November the 6th.
So I've got the privilege of wrapping up this session and telling you about the next one. And we know you're tired. We know it's been an exhausting year, not just through COVID, but being politically left. It's exhausting. We know you're worn down. But what better place to place your flag of what next than climate justice? And what better way to do that than together? Because that's how we get it done.